last video I posted was about a delightful quirk I'd found with the Matriarch's VCAs and sequencer. I discovered it while messing around when I had the sequencer keyboard control turned off in global settings. After posting the video, I ended up spending a day or so investigating further. It was really driving me crazy that I didn't have a good explanation for what was going on. So, gonna go further with that patch, and I think I finally have an explanation. There are multiple parts to this mystery. First, why are some of the oscillators following the sequencer gate output instead of the VCA envelope? And second, how is the VCA receiving trigger information from both the keyboard and the sequencer? So in the first part of this video, I'm going to take a close look at Paraphony and explain how it works. That really is the key to understanding the first mystery. Then I'll take a closer look at the gate signals from the keyboard and the sequencer and the trigger input on the Matriarch's envelope generators. That's the key to understanding the second mystery. Then I'll just show you some new variations and ways to work with this pretty awesome patch. There's links to patch diagrams in the description and an index in the description if you just want to skip to the good parts. But before we get into the walkthrough, here's a quick demo of some of the patches that came up this time around. Okay, so the easiest way I could think of to explain Paraphony was to build a paraphonic patch with a modular synthesizer. I did do a video about Paraphony a while back, but it wasn't really a deep dive into how to build a paraphonic patch and how it actually works. So let's put together a paraphonic patch. If you've done this before, you know how much of a pain in the butt it is, especially if you tried to do this more than 10 years ago. Things have really advanced in the modular world over the last while. But it's still a pain in the butt. I can't believe that before I had my Matriarch, I did this almost every day. Okay, but I guess before we go any further, I should do a quick recap of what Paraphony is. A paraphonic synth or patch has individual control over pitch for each voice. On the Matriarch, we could have 4 voices, with each voice consisting of 1 oscillator, or 2 voices, with each voice consisting of 2 oscillators. But no matter how many voices you have, they all share the same filter, VCA, and envelopes. If you play a chord using all the voices at the same time, there's really not much difference between a paraphonic and polyphonic synth. But the difference is really evident if I hit and sustain a note and then play more notes. The envelopes for the VCA and filter will not re-trigger until I have released all the keys. I'll show you again. Okay, so there's a quick explanation of Paraphony. But the Matriarch does have one neat little trick up its sleeve, the Multi-Trigger. Multi-Trig tells the Matriarch to re-trigger the envelopes every time a key is pressed or a high gate signal is received. But that doesn't make it polyphonic, because the envelopes will affect all the notes, even the ones you've already played. Alright, let's get back to our modular paraphonic patch. So the idea is putting together a paraphonic modular patch will help us better understand how the Matriarch works. So I'm going to use 2 oscillators from 2 separate Moog Mother 32s. And for my other two oscillators, I'm just going to use the two oscillators from the DFAM. And I'll use pulse waves for all the oscillators. I'm also going to need a mixer and a VCA, so I'm just going to use this IntelliGel Quad VCA. It will function as both. I'm not going to bother with a filter for this demo, at least at first, but I do need an envelope generator, so I'm going to use this old workhorse, Doepfer A141-2. It's a pretty powerful little voltage-controlled ADSR envelope generator with lots of options. In fact, all the modules I'm using are overkill. You can do this with much simpler modules and for much less money, but it's what I have in front of me, so I'm just going to go with these. All right, now the hard part. I need something to allocate the voices. So I'm going to use an Expert Sleeper's FH2 Midi-CV converter. This module is unreal. You can do so much with it. There are, of course, a ton of Midi-CV converters out there. I've talked a lot about them in the past. Everything from standalone boxes, Eurorack modules, plugins. I used to use Expert Sleeper's plugin Silent Way to do this all the time. Midi-CV converters are even standard in some DAWs now. Crazy. Okay, I'm going to quickly go through my setup for voice allocation inside the FH2's configuration screen. The first thing I need to do is enable a MIDI converter. I just need one, so I just click this little box there. Now I need to set the type of converter, either mono, poly, or MPE. We're going to use poly for a paraphonic patch. Okay, I might as well just keep moving left to right through this configuration screen. So the next thing we're going to need to do is enable a CV converter. That's going to take care of our pitch. Okay, let's scroll over to the right a little bit, and there's our number of voices. 4, it's already set at 4, and we're going to set our note priority. I'm just going to leave it on lowest voice for now, but there's a bunch of options. I've also got a bunch of options, obviously, for voices, but we'll stick with 4 to duplicate the matriarch. And lastly, we need a gate, so we're going to go to the paraphonic outputs and select paraphonic gate. Now I've got to set the voltage range for the physical outputs on the module for all of the ones receiving pitch, which is going to be outputs 1 through 4. I need it to be bipolar, so we can go up and down, so plus or minus 5 volts. And last step is to simply click the little Send to FH2 button, and we're ready to go. Okay, so now all we have to do is patch everything up. So pitch information is going to be coming from channels 1 through 4 on my FH2. So I'll patch out of those into the volt per octave inputs on all my oscillators. Like I said, this is total overkill using 2 Mother 32s and a DFAM to create a paraphonic patch. But that's fine. This is just to show us how Paraphony works. By the way, I've already calibrated all the FH2 pitch outputs and tuned all the oscillators. That's always the biggest pain in the butt in putting together a patch like this. Next, I'm going to take my gate output from the FH2 and patch that into the gate input on my envelope generator. And I'll take the fixed gate out of the envelope generator and patch that into the CV input of the IntelliGel Quad VCA, which is also acting as a mixer. Oh, and I've got to patch all the oscillator direct outs of the Mother 32 and DFAMs into the inputs on the Quad VCA. This is a simple looking module, but it's also very powerful. The CV inputs are normaled, so you only really need one CV input to activate all VCAs, and that's what we're going to be starting with. And it's the same with the audio inputs and outputs. To sum all the oscillators to one output, all I need to do is patch out of output number 4. Okay, patch complete. And I'll use this little JPlay MIDI controller to play the patch. And we have Paraphony. Or do we? Does anybody see the problem? We're getting 4 voices, but I'm playing 4-part chords, so all the voices at the same time. This is set up just like the matriarch. We've got oscillators, envelope generator, and VCA. That's where I made my mistake last week while trying to figure out what was going on with my happy accident patch. It works fine if I play all 4 notes at the same time, but what's going to happen if I try to play notes separately? Well, I guess I'll just show you. Play 3 notes at a time. Now just 1. Aha! All the voices I played are sounding even though I'm playing just 1 note. Until, of course, I cycle through all of them. Obviously, this is no good, and this is not how the matriarch works. So for this to work, I need to be able to turn on and off each oscillator individually. So I need to go back into the FH2 configuration and add gate signals for each voice. It's easy to do. All I need to do is click Send Gate. But by doing that, I've shifted the outputs on the FH2, so I'm going to need to reconfigure the voltage range quickly. Okay, I need to do some more patching again. The pitch outputs are now going to be the odd outputs 1, 3, 5, and 7, and the gate outputs are going to be outputs 2, 4, 6, and 8, respectively, for voices 1 through 4. And my Paraphonic output has now shifted up to the expander output 1 of the FH2. I still need my Paraphonic gate, of course. So now I'm going to take the Paraphonic gate output from the envelope generator out of the VCA and plug in the individual gates from each voice into each individual channel on the VCA. So now my quad VCA is actually just working as a mixer with mute switches. The CV each voice in the VCA is receiving is a gate signal, not an envelope, so just on and off. So for this to work like the Matriarch, we need another VCA. Now I've got a mixer with switches, but we still need a VCA. So to keep things simple and Moog sounding, I guess, I'm going to patch out of the quad VCA into the external input on one of the mothers. Turn the mix knob over to external input only, and I'll take the envelope from the Doepfer and patch that into... You know what, I'm going to molt it. That way we can use this envelope generator to modulate the VCA. That's what I'm doing now, out of the molt into the VCA input. And I'm going to go out of the other channel of the molt into the attenuator on the Mother 32, and out of the attenuator into the VCF, the filter cutoff. So it's even closer to the Matriarch now. I guess I could even use this second Mother 32's filter and go for a stereo filter, but not going to bother with that for now. So theoretically now we should have a fully functioning 4-voice Paraphonic patch. Yep, there we go. So we have individual voice control thanks to our mixer with its switches. Just going to change up our filter modulation so we can make that trigger behavior a little clearer. Yep, it's working. So it's just like the Matriarch. The envelopes are not re-triggered until I release all the notes. I'm sure you can hear that, but watch the little envelope trigger button. Just happens on the first note. So I'm sure a lot of you have already figured out how this explains at least the first issue with our happy accident patch, but let's make sure we totally understand. So I'm going to use the Matriarch as a MIDI controller and use its sequencer to control the modular Paraphonic patch. So I'm going to record in a quick new polyphonic sequence. We're not going to be able to hear the Matriarch because I've just got it set up as a MIDI controller and we're not getting any audio output. So I'm just kind of winging it here. Hope this sounds okay. I guess it doesn't matter. It's just a demonstration. Going to use a lot of rests and some 3-note chords, some 2-note chords, and even some single notes just to see how our Paraphony works. And I got to go into my DAW and I'm going to set the MIDI instrument to accept all incoming MIDI messages, not just my JPlay. So now we got the Matriarch and JPlay controlling the FH2. So let's see if it works. Okay, it's working. I didn't really record in the most musical sequence, but actually it's kind of cool. Bit weird. But the good news is it's working just like the Matriarch, so that's great. Okay, but back to our explanation, and I don't know why I missed this when I put the last video together. Before I had the Matriarch, I used to put together paraphonic and polyphonic patches with my modular rig all the time. I forgot that for a paraphonic patch to work, each individual voice needs a VCA, or at least an on-off switch before the filter and the master VCA. It's of course clearly marked in the Matriarch's manual signal flow chart. I guess it's just been a while since I thought about this stuff. A few of you messaged me and pointed it out right away. Anyway, what is clearly happening in the happy accident patch is the sequencer is triggering the oscillator's mute on and off, which explains the first mystery. Why the oscillators following the sequencer were not being affected by the release time of the envelope generator. It's because they'd been muted before they got to the VCA. So now, theoretically, if I increase the release time on my envelope generator and press and hold a key on the keyboard, this modular patch should behave the same way the Matriarch did. The held note will have an increased release time, and the other notes will follow the sequencer gate. Victory! We've solved Mystery 1. Just forgot that for a paraphonic synth to function, it needs switches for each oscillator. I guess because the mute switches are under the hood and not visible, I can forgive myself for overlooking them the first time. But we still do have another mystery to solve. So on to Mystery 2, the trigger behavior of the envelope generator. Well, I guess it's not really a mystery anymore because we just solved it with our modular patch. To duplicate the results from last week's Matriarch patch with this modular patch, I'm combining two gate signals, well in this case 2 MIDI controllers, one from the Matriarch sequencer and one from my keyboard. So we already know what has to happen. Somehow the Matriarch is combining keyboard and sequencer gate signals and triggering the envelope generator. But how it's doing this, we still don't know. So let's go back to the Matriarch to figure this out. And I'm going to use the scope to help demonstrate this, so I'm quickly just going to patch the sequencer gate output into a mult and the keyboard gate signal out of the back of the Matriarch into another mult. Some of these nuts are a little loose. Got to tighten those up. Don't want to lose them. And I'm going to go into global settings and again turn off sequencer keyboard control, so it's D#2, A#0, and C0 is off. And let's get that sequence going. Oh, it doesn't sound as weird on the Matriarch as it did on the modular. But I'm still gonna tinker a little bit and get it a little more listenable. There we go. Okay, so now I'm gonna plug the sequencer gate output into the scope. There it is. And the keyboard gate out into the scope. And you've probably already noticed something. The keyboard gate is following the sequencer gate. And I might as well patch the amp envelope out into the scope as well. There we go. So it's important to remember, if we're not playing a note on the keyboard, our sequencer, even with keyboard control off, will still respond to the VCA amp envelope generator. Let's address the keyboard gate mirroring the sequencer gate. There is a global setting for keyboard outs mirroring the sequencer outs and sequencer outs mirroring the keyboard outs. The important thing to note, however, is even with keyboard mirroring sequencer turned off, which is the default, the keyboard gate out still mirrors the sequence gate if the sequencer is active. But the CV and velocity outs will not, unless of course this setting is turned on. We'll get more into the keyboard gate out in a minute, but just wanted to clear that up. Okay, in the last video, I demonstrated what happens if I press and hold a key while the sequencer is running with sequencer keyboard control turned off. The keyboard gate will override the sequencer gate, which you'll be able to see on the scope in a second. And with sustain down, the VCA closes after the decay stage completes. The sequencer gate will not trigger the amp envelope, so it sounds as if the sequencer is stopped. So let's check that out. Keyboard gate is high, even with sustain at 0. But what happens if we raise sustain? And now we can hear our sequence. But while I hold a key down, neither the filter or amp envelope generator are being retriggered. But we were still hearing our sequence, so the Matriarch is switching the oscillators on and off internally using that mute switch. But the VCA and filter, I guess, are only responding to the keyboard gate and envelope, which demonstrates that the keyboard gate and sequencer gate signals are separate, which of course they are, but it also confirms that the keyboard gate signal takes priority. A good thing to know. So now let's see what happens if we patch a dead patch into the trigger input on the amp envelope generator. Okay, everything stops. Well, sorry, the VCA is no longer being triggered by the amp envelope generator. That's what's supposed to happen, so that's good. You might hear a little clicking sound, but other than that, everything's working the way you'd expect in a normal modular setup. So that just proves that changing the global settings hasn't had any unsuspected results. There's nothing going on behind the scenes internally between the envelope and VCA. Okay, let's get rid of the dead patch. In the last video, I showed you that you need to patch the gate out of the sequencer to the trigger input on the amp envelope generator so that the sequencer doesn't stop when you hit a key. Okay, so the sequencer is definitely triggering the VCA, but you can see on the scope the keyboard gate signal is high when I'm pushing down a key, and because we aren't triggering the filter envelope, so I'm actually going to turn up the cutoff so we can hear this. You can hear that the note I'm playing on the keyboard is being affected by the amp envelope. It's sustaining a little bit longer. Let's bring up the filter envelope and trigger it again. It's kind of neat. Cool. Anyway, so we know from the modular patch that for this to be functioning the way it is, the Matriarch has to be combining the sequencer gate as well as the keyboard gate signals, just like we saw in the modular patch. So let's see what happens if I play a key without the sequencer running. So on the scope you can see the keyboard gate, but nothing from the sequencer gate, which of course is patched into the trigger input on the envelope generator. Envelope generator is not being triggered, so the sequencer gate output is not mirroring the keyboard. So let's take a closer look at the keyboard gate out. Let's patch the keyboard gate out into the trigger input on the envelope generator. Our sequence is still playing and the envelope is being triggered, so the keyboard gate at the moment is following the sequencer. But if I hold down a key, that sequencer gate disappears and is replaced by the keyboard gate. So we've checked out the keyboard gate output as well as the sequencer gate output, and neither of those external outputs have a combined signal, so it has to be internal. If we take another look at the Matriarch signal flow diagram, there's nothing that would suggest that this is possible. The diagram is a little vague when it comes to gate signals. They're not separated in the diagram. Keyboard and sequencer are in the same block. There's no way I can think of to confirm this with the scope if neither of the actual outputs are mirroring each other. But we at least now have a pretty good idea of what's happening. So now we know with sequencer keyboard control turned off, the gate signals from the keyboard and sequencer are internally combined, even if something is patched into the trigger input on the envelope generator. So I guess in the end, there is still a quirk. And I have a feeling it has something to do with the Multi-Trig function. So let's leave the amp envelope trigger unpatched and hit Multi-Trig. Get the sequencer going, and I'm also going to use keyboard hold again. Okay. So far so good. Now let's play with that release. Oh, decay's a bit too short. Okay. So we're getting the same behavior we were getting when we patched the sequencer gate out into the trigger input. So I can't confirm it, but that's the signal that I think is being sent to the VCA when sequencer keyboard control is off and you hold a key on the keyboard. And we found that you don't even need to patch anything for this patch to work, you just hit Multi-Trig. But be aware, it will also trigger the filter envelope when you do that. So that does it for the mystery. Okay, I'm going to start pretty much where I left off in the last video. This is the same as the last patch with one exception. I'm triggering both filter and envelope generators with the sequencer gate output. So I've got the gate output malted and patched out of the malt into the trigger inputs for both filter and envelope generator. The filter modulation is pretty much the exact same as before. I'm just using a different malt. So step triangle wave out into a malt, out of the malt into an attenuator to be inverted, out of that attenuator to the VCF cutoff for filter 2, and directly out of the malt into the cutoff for VCF 1. And of course, sequencer keyboard control is turned off. Okay, I wanted to start here so I could remind you of the voice allocation behavior of the Matriarch. So I'm going to record in a new sequence, but never use more than 3 voices. I think I'll start with the sus chord, and I can't hear anything. Oh, of course, got something plugged into the trigger of the amp envelope. Okay, yeah, good. Okay, like I said, I'm never going to use more than 3 notes for this sequence. I'll use some single notes and use some rests, and I'm going to stick with sus chords because they sound good, and there'll be less harmonic tension if I try inversions using the oscillator octaves. Okay, I've totally lost where I was, but to hear it, we've got to plug the sequencer back into the trigger input, and let's hear it. Oh, that sounds pretty good. Okay, we've got our starting point, and let's get rid of the filter modulation just for a moment, just so we can hear things clearly. And we'll get the sequence going again and take a listen to the oscillators individually. Let's hear what oscillator 1's doing. Okay, oscillator 2. Oh, and you can really hear that mute switch click in without the filter modulation. Yeah, same thing there. Okay, that oscillator's not doing much, and oscillator 4 is going to do absolutely nothing because we'd use just 3-note voices. Okay, let's get oscillator 1 going again, and I'm going to show you what happens when I hit a key now. So oscillator 1 has been replaced with our keyboard, and oscillator 2 now is playing the sequence that oscillator 1 was. If we put oscillators 2, 3, and 4 in, we get our full sequence back. It's a lot choppier now because, as we just saw earlier, the mute switches are taking over and the amp envelope is being triggered by our keyboard. Okay, so whatever you play on the keyboard is going to default to oscillator 1, and the notes of the sequence are going to be pushed over or allocated to the remaining oscillators. Well, that sounds cool. So if you have a sequence with max 3-note chords, you can keep your full sequence and have a remaining oscillator for a lead or bass sound. So let's work on this bass sound. Want a little bit more control of the filter modulation, so take the step triangle wave and out of the mult, patched it into attenuator, and patch the mod wheel CV out into the control input of the attenuator, and out of the attenuator back into the mult. And now the mod wheel will control the amount of filter modulation. Could of course just use the attenuator itself to do this, but the mod wheel is down by the keyboard, so if I'm playing the keyboard it's a little easier to reach, and I'm in no danger of going into negative values on the attenuator. Cool, that's working pretty well. Let's go a little bit further with this bass. I'd like a thicker, bigger bass sound, but I'm already using all 4 oscillators. So I'm going to take the keyboard CV out of the back of the Matriarch, plug that into the rate input on the utility LFO, so it is now going to pitch track out of the LFO into the noise input on the mixer, and turn it up. Okay, the LFO is already at audio rate, so all I got to do is tune it. Don't want it to be exactly in tune. I want just a slight detuning so we get a kind of a chorusing effect, an octave lower. Sounds pretty good. And I can really saturate that in the mixer if I want, but it doesn't leave much room for any of the other oscillators if I do that, so I'll bring it back a little bit. And remember, with long release times, we're going to get more of a drone from our oscillator and sub-oscillator. Let's bring back the filter modulation a little bit. That's just the sub, and oscillator 1 and our sub. Okay, let's bring in oscillator 4, just one of the oscillators. Muting some of the oscillators after you've already recorded a paraphonic sequence is a good way to get some variation. Don't think I would have come up with this sequence on my own. Let's mess around with this a little bit. Sounds pretty cool. Let's add a little bit more delay. And the LFO is tracking great. So this is working out pretty well so far. Okay, let's go into global settings and mess around even more with our voice allocation. I'm going to turn on round robin. That's G sharp 2, D sharp 0, and to turn it on it's E0, but I'm only going to hit it once, so I'm going to stay in global settings mode so I can compare them. Cool, and now you can hear the sequence generated by oscillator 4 is a little bit more complex because now the voices of the sequence are being rotated between oscillator 2, 3, and 4. So that's without round robin, and with round robin. Okay, it's actually not that much different with this sequence, just one extra note. Depending on your sequence, you can get all kinds of crazy results. This one's just a little different. But Let's mess around with the other oscillators now and change up their wave shapes and octaves. And see if we get something a little more musical. Let's see what happens if we use round robin mode with reset. Yeah, not a huge difference with this patch. We'll have to try it again in the next patch. But let's play around with the filter a little bit. Just little tiny movements, little tiny movements with the decay and release time and envelope amount on the filter. Now we're getting somewhere. Okay, we'll try round robin mode one more time. There we go. It's a little bit more apparent with oscillator 2 in the mix as well, especially if we bring it up the octave. There we go. Okay, let's go a step further with our bass sound. I'm going to use the envelope generator to modulate the pulse width of oscillator 1. Oh, it sounds like it's too much. Yeah, that's too much. Let's try the other envelope. That's good. It's shorter envelope time. Yeah, nice. I think I'll go with that for now. If it bugs me, I guess I'll use the other attenuator to attenuate that pulse width modulation a bit, but for now I like it. And remember, the release on the amp envelope generator is really only going to affect oscillator 1, and I guess our sub-oscillator as well. So if we bring it back, we can get it to be more punchy. It's too punchy. It's kind of nice there. Okay, that's kind of neat, but let's get the oscillators all in the same octave and get closer to our original sequence. So put them all on pulse waves, and I'm going to add a little pulse width modulation and bring in my filter modulation. Now we're getting somewhere. Sounds nice with that sequence. Let's hear what it sounds like with the single oscillators with the pulse width modulation. Oh, that's really cool. Like that. Oh, yeah, with that one on narrow pulse, that's really cool. Let's see what filter key tracking does. It's a little too extreme. I'm going to put it at 0 to smooth it out a little bit. Okay, let's go back to that original sequence. Cool. Okay, and let's change our... Oh, why is my bass note changing? Oh, I'm still in round robin mode. Gotta hit a modifier key twice. Okay. There we go. Okay, well, that's basically this patch. Basically the same as the last week's patch, but a few more options for you to play around with. And that's what I'm going to do. I'm just going to mess around with this for a couple minutes before we move on to the next one. Okay, moving on. This time I'm going to show you how to build the Happy Accident patch without any patch cables. It's pretty simple. I'm going to go into Global Settings, and of course, once again, turn off Sequence Keyboard Control, D#2, A#0, and C0. Then, of course, you'd record a sequence. I'm just going to use the one we've been using. Hit play, and there we go. Okay, I want this to be punchy. Just going to tighten up the envelopes. Oh, sounds like the VCA is in split mode. Make sure it's in amp envelope mode. We're going to talk a lot about that later on anyway. And if we hit a key, the VCA closes. So we just hit Multi-Trig. And that's all there is to it. There's the Happy Accident patch. Well, the foundation at least. So just going to tinker a little bit until I find something I like. Oscillator 2 is definitely being held at the moment. So let's flip oscillators 1 and 2 over triangle waves. Raise the cutoff a little bit and add in some filter modulation. And let's play around with our envelope shapes to get some of the drone that's a big part of this patch. And with Multi-Trig on, our filter envelope generator is obviously also being triggered. So we can mess around with some filter modulation. Okay, let's have a listen to these oscillators. There's oscillator 3 and 4. And there's 2 and 1. Okay, 1 didn't hold, so I'm going to hit the keyboard again. There we go. Okay, let's bring back oscillators 3 and 4 again. It's a little bit too much drone now, so I'm just going to lower the decay on the amp envelope. That's better, kind of almost bell-like now. Okay, that's pretty good, but let's try to get some more movement in this patch. So I guess we'll use some more filter modulation. In the first Happy Accident patch, I used the step triangle, so I might as well do that now. And I'm just going to do it right from the mod bay internally. Got some pulse width modulation going to oscillators 3 and 4 as well. That's pretty cool. Nice. Okay, let's try some filter key tracking and get even more modulation happening. Nice. And some secret sauce. Little slapback delay. Okay, you know what? I'm going to add in some reverb. I'm just going to use a plugin, Lexicon 224 here by Universal Audio. I've got the crossover around 1 kilohertz, and I've got the mid and high frequencies cranked pretty high. Love this reverb. Okay, let's move on. And let's explore envelope shapes a little more. And we might as well take a look at what's going on. So I'm going to patch the envelope out of both envelope generators into a scope. Remember, patching out of the envelope generators does not break the normal connection. I'll take the gate out and patch that into a scope, and I'm going to switch into ARP mode. And for fun, I'll use a 3-octave range. Turning off sequence keyboard control has no effect when you're using the arpeggiator, just affects the sequencer. As you can see, when I hit play, nothing happens. But wanted to use the arpeggiator to demonstrate this part, just so envelope behavior is super clear. Wow, check that out. Some pretty complex envelope shapes. Super cool. So the red trace is the filter envelope generator, and I guess that's green. That's the VCA. I've got an idea. toggling 4-voice on and off to make sure it stays in 4-voice. And I'm going to play a 4-note chord. I doubled the root in octaves, so oscillators 1 and 2 are going to play the root, but oscillators 3 and 4 are on the 3rd and 7th. I'm patching wave out of oscillator 3 into the noise input on the mixer. So if you're in 4-voice mode on the arpeggiator, you're actually only using oscillator 1. Let me show you. Oops, forgot to push hold. Okay, so if I turn off oscillator 1, you're not going to hear anything. Oscillators 2, 3, and 4 are being muted by the Paraphony mute, but the noise input is not. So what we're hearing is oscillator 3. It's playing that B flat I played before I started the arpeggiator. And I'm going to bring back oscillator 1 and switch into dual mode, and now I can turn up oscillator 2, which is now unmuted in the mixer, as you can hear, and is also being key tracked by the arpeggiator. Cool. And listen to those envelopes. Okay, it's a little bit of a tangent, so let's get back to envelope behavior. So I'm going to bring release on the amp envelope all the way down. And the filter envelope's really kind of obscuring what we're listening for, so I'm just going to get rid of all filter on modulation. I even take it out of the scope. Okay, so first let's take a look at attack. I'm going to put release at 0 and attack at 0 just to get started, and I'm slowly going to bring up attack. So you can hear it's getting quieter, but now you can see why it's getting quieter. On the Matriarch, the attack is always re-triggered whenever the synth gets a high gate signal. So if the attack time is too long, well, you just saw what happens. It doesn't have time to get up to its full volume before it's re-triggered. Now, it's a different story for release, which is not reset when a high gate signal or the envelope begins again. So that's how we've been getting these drone-like sounds in all these patches. Now take a look at all these crazy envelope shapes we're getting. Now we're getting these all the time. This is the normal Matriarch behavior. I haven't really done anything yet. So attack is being re-triggered regardless of the stage of release, which, as you can see, runs its full course. You get those neat little swells. So let's try this out with the filter envelope. And I'm purposefully going to set up totally different envelope shapes so we get all kinds of filter and dynamic swells happening at different times. And we should probably add in a little bit more filter envelope modulation. Super cool. Now that's a pretty awesome dynamic patch. So I'm going to shut up and mess around with this for a little bit. Cool, that was fun. Cool, but let's go back into 4-voice mode and put the patch back to pretty much where we left off. So noise down in the mixer, bring up all the oscillators to around 9 o'clock. Turn on the sequencer, and sequence keyboard control is obviously still off because it just started up automatically. And let's get our oscillators all in the same octave for now. And I'm going to put them all to the same wave shape as well. Just use saw. Okay, so now that we've messed around a little bit with our envelope shapes and we know how those things work, let's switch the VCA into split mode. Remember, in split mode, the filter envelope generator does double duty. It still modulates the filter cutoff for both filters 1 and 2, but it also modulates VCA 1. Amp envelope generator still just modulates VCA 2. So let's solo oscillators 1 and 2 because they're the ones that are going to be affected the most by this. Oscillators 3 and 4 are following the sequencer gate, remember? Now this part of the video might be better to listen on headphones or at least really good stereo speakers so you can hear what's happening to our left and right channels. You should be able to hear oscillators 1 and 2 modulating from left to right, and that's due to the different envelope times, specifically the attack and release of both of the envelope generators. That sounds cool. Almost like a compressor and a sidechain. Neat. I like the saw waves from oscillator 3 and 4. They're kind of nice, but I want more movement, so I'm going to switch it over to pulse. That way we can get some pulse with modulation. Cool. Alright, I said I wasn't going to patch anything, but might as well go further. So if I was going to add just one patch, it would be the slewed random wave into envelope filter amount, just for some super subtle variations. And let's get back to our envelopes and mess around some more. If you try this out, I suggest you do really small movements with the filter envelopes. You can get all kinds of different polyrhythm type sounds, but it's free running, so it's hard to get it in time as well. That's kind of nice, but still not crazy about it. So I'm just going to work on oscillators 1 and 2 first and sort out the movement of the drone a little bit. Again, small movements. And patience. Okay, that's some good stereo movement. It's not really a clear pattern, but I can live with that, so let's continue on. Okay, let's experiment with the sequencer gate length. The gate length is controlled through Midi-CV. So you can send CC messages from your DAW or use an external MIDI controller. I'm just going to use this TouchOS-C template I made for the Matriarch, which I'm controlling with my iPad, which I'm also using to film this video. So you're not going to be able to see me physically turn the dial, but you can watch it in the little window on the left there. Okay, that's making a difference. That's pretty cool, actually. Let's mute oscillators 1 and 2 because this is going to affect oscillators 3 and 4 more because they're following the sequencer gate. Super cool. Let's make some adjustments with the filter. That obviously changes it a lot, especially the two notes that are right after each other. They're pretty much tied now. It's cool that the envelopes are still being re-triggered at that point too. Okay, let's bring in oscillators 1 and 2 again. Oh, and that just gave me another idea we're going to try in a minute. But first I'm going to zoom in on the scope, pay particular attention to oscillators 3 and 4. Super cool. Okay, that idea I had was to be able to bring in oscillators 1 and 2 gradually as I play the keyboard, but you can see that's pretty hard to turn 2 knobs and play the keyboard at the same time. Although just bringing 1 in and messing with the mix is also kind of fun. Oh, that's beautiful. But let's set something up so we can control the volume of those 2 oscillators with just 1 control. So I've obviously turned both oscillators 1 and 2 off in the mixer, and I'm going to patch directly out of the wave outputs for each of those oscillators into a mult. So the mult is going to act as a summing mixer, out of the mult into an attenuator, which will act as a volume control. Now I'm patching, I hope I can find it, the mod wheel CV from the back of the Matriarch into the CV control for that attenuator. So the mod wheel will act as volume control for the attenuator, and out of the attenuator into the noise input in the mixer, and we'll turn up the noise. And there we have it. So by using the mod wheel to control the attenuator, I can easily play the keyboard and mod wheel at the same time. And if I turn up the noise volume, I can get it so it goes into saturation at the top end of the mod wheel. That's pretty cool. Nice. Okay, but I'm not done with the envelopes yet. Now that we've increased the gate length, check out what happens if I increase decay, but especially sustain. Check out how it really changes the rhythm of the sequence. Sounds kind of drunk. Love it. I like what's going on, just some small tinkering with the mixer and the filter. Okay, I'm just going to play around for a little bit, and I think that will do it for this patch. Thanks for watching. Hope you learned something.